Verse 42 states that there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And the mite is defined as a small coin, which also proves that we're talking about money here. In verse 43, Jesus tells the disciples that this poor widow has cast more in than all of those who have cast into the treasury. Because as Jesus states in verse 44, all of the rich people cast money in out of their abundance, and the poor widow of her want cast in all that she had, even all her living. And in both of these instances, this proves that the money given to the temple treasury were free will gifts that had no percentage placed on them for the giver. The people gave money to the treasury as they purposed in their hearts to give, as evidenced by the poor widow woman who cast all that she had into the temple treasury. And the people also gave as they prospered financially, as evidenced by the rich who cast money into the temple treasury out of their abundance, as stated in verse 44. At this point, you want to drive your point home. Explain to them that there are no records in the New Testament of the Apostle Paul paying tithes to anyone or collecting tithes from anyone. And the reason the Apostle Paul said nothing to the church about the payment of tithes or the collection of tithes is because the tithe is not for the church, as the tithe was food and not money. The tithe was a food program designed by God and given by God through Moses to the Israelites to feed the Levites, strangers to the land, the fatherless, and widows. The Apostle Paul stated that we are not to give out of having constraints placed on us to give. And the 10% tithe is a constraint that has been placed on givers for generations. At this point, take them to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, where the Apostle Paul states, "Every man, according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver." Next, inform them that people are to give as they purpose in their hearts, which in the Greek, the word purposeth is the word proai reomai, and it is defined as to choose for oneself before another thing, prefer, i.e., to propose, intend, purpose. The 10% tithe goes totally against this definition, as the people are not allowed to choose for themselves what and if they are going to give, because the preachers and teachers have chosen that the people will give. So the people have no choice. And the preachers and teachers have chosen how much the people will give, which is 10%. And this proves the 10% tithe is not for the church. The people are to decide everything themselves about their giving. The people can give whatever they choose to give. They are not to give grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. People are not to give out of necessity, which is the Greek word ananke, which is defined as constraint, which means that the people are not to give out of having constraints placed on them to give. The 10% tithe goes totally against this definition, as biblically, no preacher and teacher is allowed to place constraints on people dictating how much they are supposed to give. The people decide how much they are going to give, and the people make the decision whether or not to give. God loves the cheerful giver, which results from people having the unobstructed freedom to give however they choose to give, with no constraints placed on their giving whatsoever. People are to give as they purpose in their hearts to give, and they are not to give out of having constraints placed on them to give. And the 10% tithe is a constraint.